A clothing as silent poetry. What if every thread on your body told a story of who you are, where you came from, what season it is, how experienced you are, even what you're allowed to say without ever speaking? For the geisha of Japan, clothing wasn't just clothing. It was a layered language, a living canvas painted in silk and time. Each morning, a geisha wrapped herself in ritual. From the very first underlayer to the final flick of a hairpin, her attire was precision, poetry, and discipline woven together. It announced her presence long before she entered the room, and long after she left, the memory of her silhouette, graceful, composed, intentional, lingered like perfume. Today on Japan, Rewind, we peel back the layers, not to expose, but to understand. To see why what geisha wore mattered so deeply, and how every element, from the softest collar to the tallest sandal, held centuries of meaning. This is not just about garments, it's about identity, stitched with care, worn with pride, and passed down through generations of quiet strength. Let's begin with what lies closest to the skin, and work our way out. The underlayers, where discipline begins. Beneath every elegant kimono lies a structure, and that structure begins with the unseen. Geisha began by donning a thin cotton or silk garment called the harajuban, an undershirt worn next to the skin. Above this came the susoyoke, a kind of slip to preserve modesty. Over both, they layered the nagajuban, an under kimono that remained hidden but was almost always made of exquisite fabric. A crisp white collar, han-eri, was attached here. This was the only part visible once fully dressed. Cleanliness was spiritual. These inner garments absorbed sweat, protected the outer kimono, and created a smooth canvas for the garments to come. But their meaning went deeper. White wasn't just a neutral color. It symbolized purity, readiness, and internal discipline. A crooked collar or rumpled fold was more than a wardrobe mistake. It was a failure of presence. Dressing in these layers required mindfulness. Each fold was adjusted with care. Each step was silent. The act of dressing became almost sacred, a ritual of transformation from the everyday self to the disciplined, poised artist who would step out into the public eye. In this way, the underlayers became a metaphor, the unseen effort that upholds everything others admire. The geisha understood that beauty begins long before anyone is watching. Kimono, the changing language of seasons. The most striking part of a geisha's appearance is her kimono, but no two were ever alike. Each kimono was chosen with seasonal accuracy, artistic purpose, and personal nuance, all balanced within the bounds of strict tradition. In spring, one might find embroidered cherry blossoms or flowing streams. In summer, lighter fabrics bore motifs of dragonflies or bamboo. Come autumn, maple leaves, pampas grass, or migrating birds adorned the silks. And in winter, subtle snowflakes or plum blossoms signaled perseverance amid the cold. The seasons weren't just background, they were central. A geisha wore her environment, aligning herself with the rhythms of the natural world. To wear a winter motif in spring would be jarring, almost rude. Seasonal harmony was etiquette. The cut and color of the kimono revealed status. Young Maiko wore the furisode, long-sleeved kimonos that flowed behind them in dramatic arcs. Their colors were bright, vermilion, turquoise, jade. Their energy was youthful, spirited, blooming. By contrast, a senior geisha wore more subdued colors, indigo, deep plum, bronze, and shorter sleeves. Their presence wasn't meant to dazzle, but to radiate calm authority. Simplicity, in this context, was strength. The inner lining of the kimono also held secrets. Some bore poetry. Others featured hidden embroidery, visible only when the hem moved just right. These were quiet indulgences, a reward for those who paid close attention. To a trained eye, a geisha's kimono could be read like a novel. It spoke of time, place, and emotion. It was a performance in cloth, a wearable haiku composed of thread and season. Obi, discipline wrapped in silk. If the kimono was the canvas, the obi was the signature that tied it all together, both literally and symbolically. The obi is a wide sash, often made of stiff brocade or heavy silk, that wraps tightly around the waist. Its purpose was more than aesthetic. It structured the entire look, holding the layers in place while becoming a focal point of the ensemble. And much like the rest of the attire, it evolved with rank and role. Young Maiko wore the dorari obi, a long trailing sash that could reach nearly to the back of the knees. It was ornate, dramatic, and required an expert hand to tie correctly. This style was youthful, exuberant, and unmistakably apprentice level. It turned every step into a visual performance. Geisha, on the other hand, wore the taiko musubi, or drum knot, a tighter, more compact style resembling a wrapped box. Reserved and symmetrical, it reflected the maturity and control expected of a full geisha. Tying the obi was a skilled ritual in itself, often requiring assistance. It had to be pulled tight enough to provide support, but not so tight as to disrupt the wearer's breath or movement. Done correctly, it encouraged perfect posture and an upright stance, a physical reminder to remain composed. The obi also held practical significance. Small tools, folding fans, or ceremonial items could be tucked discreetly inside, and its design often displayed the most intricate embroidery, cranes, waves, blossoms, even scenes from classical literature. Far from a decorative afterthought, the obi was symbolic armor. It framed the geisha's body and emphasized restraint as beauty. In a society that celebrated subtlety, the obi whispered power. Every time a geisha wrapped it around herself, it was an act of transformation, a tightening, a centering, a surrender to the rules of grace. Kanzashi, hairpins that whispered seasons. To complete her transformation, a geisha turned her attention to her hair, specifically the arrangement of kanzashi, the ornate hairpins that crowned her head like seasonal punctuation marks. But these pins were not chosen at random. They formed a visual language understood only by those within the cultural world of the geisha. Their materials, tortoiseshell, silver, lacquered wood, varied according to tradition and season. Their designs were dictated by the calendar and the wearer's rank. For example, in January, kanzashi might depict plum blossoms, a symbol of endurance. In March, cherry blossoms celebrated fleeting beauty. Summer brought fans, fireworks, or goldfish. In autumn, dragonflies or pampas grass. Winter brought pine, cranes, or snowflakes. These motifs weren't decorative. They were declarations. Maiko wore the most elaborate styles. Their hairpins cascaded in layers of dangling ornaments that shimmered with every head tilt. These were worn with the traditional wear-shinobu hairstyle, high buns with red silk threads and decorative centerpieces. Their movement was intentional, poetic, magnetic. Senior geisha wore simpler, more restrained kanzashi, a single comb, a refined silver pin, an elegant tortoiseshell accessory tucked neatly into an immaculate chignon. Their silence was their sophistication. The number, placement, and choice of kanzashi even marked career milestones. On a Maiko's 20th birthday, she might wear a special kanzashi to symbolize coming of age. In formal events, more traditional or antique styles might be worn to show respect. To the untrained eye, these pins may look ornamental, but to those who understand their code, kanzashi are seasonal, social, and spiritual statements. They frame the face, they carry the calendar, And in the floating world, they speak when the geisha remains silent. Footwear. Grace one step at a time. From head to toe, everything a geisha wore had weight, meaning, and intent, and her footwear was no exception. The journey began with white tabi socks, split toe and immaculately clean. Tabi were more than just socks. They were part of a geisha's visual purity. A stained tabi would be as shocking as a smudged collar, and so they were often changed throughout the day. Then came the shoes. For Maiko, these were the tall wooden clogs known as okobo. Shaped like hollow platforms and often over 10 centimeters high, okobo added height and rhythm to the Maiko's presence. As she walked through the stone alleyways of Gion, her steps produced a signature clacking sound, a soft announcement of arrival. This sound became part of her mystique. The elevation of okobo wasn't just visual, it forced the Maiko to take slower, more deliberate steps. She couldn't rush. Her walk became part of her performance, a flowing, gliding, graceful movement that turned even the mundane act of walking into an art form. Geisha wore more practical footwear, zori or geta, flatter sandals made of lacquered wood or woven straw. These allowed greater ease of movement, but still required posture and control. Like everything in the geisha's world, they balanced function with form. Footwear also marked formal occasions. The more decorative the zori or the richer the material, velvet, gold thread, or mother-of-pearl inlay, the higher the level of ceremony. A geisha never overdressed or underdressed her feet. The choice of sandal completed the message. In a culture where elegance lived in restraint, even shoes were a declaration. The feet moved slowly. The body followed suit. And grace, born from discipline, reached the ground with every carefully measured step. The layers were ritual. To the geisha, dressing was never simply about getting ready. It was a sacred act, a daily ceremony of transformation. Each layer was added in a precise order. The undergarments aligned first, then the under kimono, followed by the outer kimono, the obi accessories, and kanzashi. Every motion, every tug of fabric, every tie of a sash was mindful. Many geisha described this process as meditative, grounding, even spiritual. No music played in the background. No mirrors were fogged with distraction. Silence accompanied the ritual. It was a quiet space of focus, where the inner self was shed and the public persona gradually emerged. For geisha who dressed themselves, this ritual became second nature. For others, especially Maiko, it was assisted by dressers or senior house staff. But even then, nothing was casual. The tying of an obi knot could take 10 minutes. Kanzashi were placed with millimeter precision. The final turn in the mirror wasn't to admire beauty, but to confirm presence. Even the fabrics themselves demanded respect. Silk creased if handled carelessly. Hair ornaments could crack if dropped. Every item required careful handling. And so, from a young age, geisha were taught to move slowly, breathe evenly, and act with intention. The ritual of dressing wasn't only external, it changed how she felt. Her spine straightened, her steps softened, her voice grew quieter. The layers worked on her as much as she worked on them. And when she was finally ready, stepping into the world like a painting brought to life, she did so not just as a woman in beautiful clothing, but as the living vessel of an entire tradition, kimono as social armor and silent power. In the quiet elegance of a geisha's ensemble, there was strength. Not the kind shouted or shown, but the kind woven in silk, coated in fabric, and passed from woman to woman. Geisha were often misunderstood by outsiders, assumed to be courtesans or entertainers in the Western sense. But their attire said otherwise. It created a boundary. It defined them as something entirely unique. In a patriarchal world where women were often seen but not heard, the geisha used visual language as armor. Her kimono, her obi, her hair, her footwear, they were all carefully chosen, deliberate shields. They broadcast sophistication, education, training. They signaled, without a word, that she was not body property. She was tradition incarnate. When she entered a room, her appearance silenced chatter, not from fear, but reverence. Her garments told people how to behave around her, how to speak, whether they were worthy of her presence. Her silence became authority. Her stillness, command. Even within the geisha community, hierarchy was visible. The subtlety of a motif, the simplicity of a sash, the choice of color or hairstyle. These were not fashion statements. They were rank, reputation, and history. Her attire also granted protection. It separated her from the world of common dress. It created psychological space where she could perform her role while shielding the woman underneath. The kimono, in this way, was not fragile. It was not submissive. It was structured, heavy, demanding. A burden willingly accepted in exchange for the dignity it afforded. Geisha were not soft. They were steel-wrapped in beauty, and every fold of fabric was a quiet, radiant form of power, passing down the fabric of memory. The kimono was never just hers. It belonged to a lineage. Many geisha wore garments handed down from their teachers, sisters, or house elders. Each piece held memories, a performance, a ceremony, a milestone. To wear it was to wear history. In geisha culture, textiles were rarely discarded. They were repurposed, relined, resized. A frayed collar might be mended. An obi might be flipped and sewn with new life. These weren't acts of frugality. They were acts of reverence. Sometimes a young maiko would inherit the kimono of a now-retired geisha. Wearing it wasn't about copying. It was about continuity. As she walked the streets of Gion, the past walked with her. Some kimonos bore embroidered poetry. Others had motifs requested by mentors or mentors' mentors. The garment became a message passed down, threaded with blessings, with quiet advice, with silent pride. When a geisha finally retired, she might pass on her most meaningful kimono to a successor. The moment was deeply emotional. Tears were often shed. For in this act, the fabric became more than memory. It became legacy. This is how tradition lives, not through grand speeches, not through monuments, but through the touch of a hand adjusting a sleeve that was once worn by someone long gone. The geisha doesn't just wear the kimono. She carries those who came before her. And when the time is right, she lets the next carry her too. Wearing the past forward. When we look at a geisha, we often admire her elegance, but now we can also see something else. Every layer she wears is a story, a season, a symbol, a silent act of devotion. Her wardrobe is not decoration, it's declaration of her discipline, her identity, her lineage, and her right to exist not as an object of beauty, but as a living embodiment of art. In today's world, where clothing often prioritizes ease and efficiency, the slow, deliberate ritual of the geisha's attire reminds us, meaning takes time. Style can have soul, and tradition is not always behind us. Sometimes it walks beside us. Her garments hold centuries. They remember, they instruct, they resist the forgetfulness of modern life. To wear such layers is to submit to something greater than yourself, to carry weight with grace, to stand in lineage, and to honor it. So the next time you see a photo of a geisha, or catch a glimpse of one walking through Kyoto's lantern-lit alleys, remember, you are witnessing history in motion. A living scroll written not in ink, but in thread. If this journey into the wardrobe of geisha moved you, please subscribe to Japan Rewind. We uncover the quiet histories hiding in plain sight. Leave a comment with the garment or detail that surprised you most and what it made you feel. Until next time, remember, history lives not just in books, but in every thread we choose to carry forward.